I've just read Hillbilly Elegy, which is J.D. Vance's book. It is actually. Can we get the cover up?
What is it? A memoir? A novel? What are we talking about?
So it's written from J.D. Vance's perspective, and it sort of covers his childhood to
in the first
early
person.
adult. Yeah.
So it's an autobiography.
No, but the thing is, it's not, right. So it's not really about him. It's about the family around him, and you know this because the chapter when he goes off and does the Marines, he's not around his family, and he skims through it so incredibly quickly. It's really a story about his family, and
he was in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, I'll go through briefly his story because I think it's a fascinating perspective on who this man is. Because when I first heard it was J.D. Vance, I did the standard thing, which is, okay, what's his views on China or Ukraine or something like that, and you just go straight to the big externalities, really. Mm-hmm. What I got from reading this is perhaps what inspired choice that he is. Okay. Because, and certainly MSNBC, I was watching them reacting to the Vance pick, and they just couldn't get it at all because they were just like, yeah, but he's from Ohio, yes. And was it Kentucky?
Right.
And MSNBC was just like, well, Trump's going to win those states anyway, so why would you pick him? And reading this book, it gave me an appreciation that Trump probably doesn't just want to win. He wants to actually do something with that win. And he wants to do something for the people who voted for him, which is not normally how politics works.
Certainly not in this country.
You only do something for your most marginal voters. You don't do it for your hardcore voters. And whatever it was, Kentucky went like 62% Trump.
And also another thing to say is that you obviously want to win your presidential race if you're running to be the president. Yeah. But ideally, also, you want your party to control Congress and the Senate, if possible, if you can get the trifecta. So that is really important because it's one thing to be president, but then if you're just immediately hamstrung by not controlling either Congress or Senate, then you won't be able to get much done. So
this book he actually wrote after finishing Yale Law, and it's apparently an international bestseller. It sold over 1 million copies. So this was a big selling book long before he got into politics. Right. And it is a good read. I mean, nothing remarkable happens in it apart from the fact that somebody with a background like that, and I'll tell you briefly about his background, ends up going to Yale Law, let alone becoming the next VP of the United States, because he does have a sort of horrific background. There's also a Netflix version of this, which I didn't watch because I just thought, well, Netflix, they probably cast a black lesbian as J.D. Vance. But I did skim through it this morning. And it doesn't look that bad. One thing actually the Netflix version does do very well is it shows his town when his grandparents arrived in this middle town, and it was vibrant, and that would have been 1940s, maybe early 1950s. And then it cuts to him driving in with his mum like 30 years later, and the whole place is just run down, shut down, all the industry's gone. So the Netflix version did do that well, I saw at least. But yeah, so basically it describes about Vance growing up in this Rust Belt town.
Sort of post-industrial American heartland. Yeah.
And actually the story starts with his family's roots in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. As the title suggests, a bunch of hillbillies. And the story kind of really starts with his grandparents, which he calls Mama and Papow, and they were born during the Great Depression in Kentucky, and then they moved and in fact, his grandmother got pregnant at 13 with his aunt, and they moved up to Ohio. Why can't I say that?
Ohio.
That's the one, to get work. And his grandfather was a good man by the standards of the time. I'm using that term a little bit loosely, but that included the fact that he could get violent and drunk. And in fact, his grandmother once set his grandfather on fire after telling him, if you come home drunk one more time, I'm going to set you on fire. And he did.
So she was a woman of her word.
So she literally set him on fire, and J.D. Vance, his mother and aunt, had to put their father out lying on the lounge floor. So I mean, his grandmother, who he idolizes, was clearly a bit of a character. So she very nearly killed a man at 12. Somebody was trying to steal chickens, so she just grabbed the shotgun and blasted him.
Based.
Yes, the dude lived.
Value your life more than my chickens.
Yeah. So I mean, his grandmother was definitely a character. I mean, another anecdote that I quite like from the story was that they once concluded that a pervert had stolen JD from church. So his grandparents pulled out their magnums and basically held up the car park and wouldn't let anyone leave without having their vehicle searched. And it turned out he was actually just asleep on one of the pews. But I mean, that's the kind of family that they were. The patriarch and the matriarch of the family were definitely the grandparents, and he was really raised by them. But whatever else they were, they managed to raise dysfunctional children. Because Vance's own mother,
can't believe it.
Yeah, Vance, because I mean they were silent generation,
sure,
and they did the whole thing of pitch up, get work, get a 4-bedroom large house, live comfortably, have holidays, have cars. Yeah. So I mean they just did the standard thing. But even we think of the boomers as having it all easy, but by the time that town had got to his mother's generation, the baby boomer generation, I mean, it was already starting to fall apart. And also that the social problems that engendered with it as well. So his mother was basically working her way through the spectrum of drugs, eventually ending up overdosing on heroin. I mean, she was a messed up. No, not to death. I think she's still alive. I mean, she was alive when the book came out and the film came out. So I don't know what's happened to her since. And apparently she was clean for 6 years by the time the film came out, which was 4 years ago. So maybe she's 10 years clean now. But she basically worked her way through a series of men. So Vance had 5 different stepdads. Right. And because she was a drug addict and cycling through men, and when she was cycling through men, she was looking for the one that would finally treat her right, which is the classic sort of woman thing. It's quite obvious when you read the book that the men weren't the problem, because I mean, some of them were deadbeats, but some of them left her and then had perfectly functional lives afterwards. She was the only common denominator in each of those relationships. Yeah, I mean, she worked up to heroin. I mean, she took a while to get to that, but she was definitely somebody who was completely incapable of taking responsibility for anything ever. So yeah, not a great role model. So he was kind of raised by his grandparents, even though they were a little distance away. I mean, they weren't that far away. So, but he was raised largely by his grandparents, and also his older sister, who was 4 years older. And they sort of, between them, they raised him. But I mean, the mother's home life was so unstable that their grandfather sneakily installed a telephone at the bottom of their toy box, so that if things got really bad, they could go to the covert phone and give the grandparents a ring, and they would come over. Yeah. So even though he idolizes his grandparents, they did raise a daughter who was a complete screw up. And he was always finding out that, we had a new stepdad situation going on. I mean, at one point they were living with this guy, and they seemed to be having problems. And then one day they get home and their mum says, "Oh, I got married." He's like, "Well, what do you mean? I thought you weren't getting on with this guy." He's like, "Oh no, I didn't marry him. I just married somebody else." And the next day they pitch up at this other guy's house and just move in with their family. So JD himself, I mean, he was spiraling for a long time, because of course, you would get into a situation where he'd be absent from school for understandable reasons, and then he'd get a letter home from school saying, all of these absences, and the parent has to sign off on it. He doesn't know, well, he does know who his dad is, but his dad doesn't live anywhere close anymore, and his mother's in one of her stints in rehab. So, his sister has to forge the signature, and they kind of have to get on with life. So he was really spiraling, but because his sister was older, I mean, of course, she got out of that situation as soon as she could. She married young, a bit like all the women in her family had, and she had left. She actually had a successful relationship and still does, as far as I know. But he was really spiraling when he was left with just his mother, and it was going to live with his grandmother, his mama, as he put it, that really kind of started putting him on the straight and narrow, because she was a wiry old bird, but she was a bit of a hard taskmaster as well. And she started, putting his life in order, because one of the anecdotes he tells is that she had to buy an expensive calculator for him, one of these scientific calculators for, it was a thing back then. And if she was going to have to spend $84 on a calculator, he was bloody well going to come top of the class. So, it started doing stuff like that. And also he started hanging out with like deadbeat friends and stuff like that. And she just told him, "If you spend any more time with those boys, I will kill them by running them over with my car." And because it's her,
he believed it. Yeah.
And and maybe she would have done as well.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that she would have done. So, I mean, he started to get his act together.
That's so important, particularly for a young man. That might not be fair, but for young people, being told unequivocally no sometimes, that's just a massive, massive life.
And it's
no, you can't do that thing. No, it's not happening. End of story.
It's actually very difficult for a mother or a grandmother to do that, because the same request that comes from a father as opposed to a mother can feel emasculating coming from a mother, which is why single mothers have so much more difficulty raising boys because of that sort of influence thing. But this character was clearly a strong enough woman that she was able to sort of get that line across and keep him together.
Sometimes a very strong grandmother is often actually is the case for a young boy, because he's not going, like, there's just sort of an innate respect sometimes, much more than even your own mother, if it's your grandmother.
Yeah.
Because you can't sort of fly in the face of what she says as much.
And she was definitely a tough character. And she started getting his act together for him. Well, I mean, I suppose he did it himself, but she was the right guidance, and there wasn't this revolving door of men. And there was multiple stories of, like, with his mother about how she would spiral, and the next thing they know, they would all be stood on the front lawn while she was being taken away in a police car with all the neighbours coming out to watch. Yeah. But it was that sort of neighbourhood. So the next week it would be one of the neighbours doing the same thing, and they would be stood outside watching. It was just like one of those sort of dysfunctional communities. I mean, it was a strong community in a way that they kind of looked out for each other, but it was also a dysfunctional one in many ways. So then he started getting his grades together, and then he goes off to the Marines. And like I say, because it's not an autobiography, because his section about the Marines is so short, because it's really about the family around him that he wants to talk about. So when it's just him, it kind of drops. In fact, even the stuff in the Marines is just about what was going on in the family and the letters he was getting and stuff like that. But they really sorted him out as well, because, I mean, he'd been raised on a diet of basically deep fried food. And so the Marines took one look at him and said, "You fat tub of shit," and started sorting him out. Knocked him into shape quite quickly. And so did
he ever go into theatre? Was he ever in combat?
I think he was a war correspondent. But the thing is, he doesn't say in the book what he mentions that he was doing. No, actually, that's what it is. It's because, I mean, you don't get a sense from the book, but clearly the guy's a very, very smart guy. I mean, he set up his own VC investment firm. I mean, he graduated Yale Law as an editor of the Law Review. Oh, at Venture Capital.
Oh, okay.
And he's gone on to be, so he's clearly a very, very bright guy, but he doesn't big himself up at all in the book. You just get the impression he's a perfectly standard guy. But clearly the Marines recognised what they had when they had him, because they had a post which is normally filled by a captain, which is sort of media relations, where you need to sort of, you'll be in the office 1 minute with the generals, getting the briefing of what's going on, and then you're being out taking hostile questions from journalists. And they booted out a captain and put him in, and he was just a monkey recruit that they sort of picked for this. So they clearly recognised that they had something with this guy. But yeah, he doesn't really talk about that much. And then he sort of goes on to Yale Law, where he got a full scholarship, which is the only way that he could have afforded it to get in. And his work ethic was obviously quite severe. I mean, he put in huge amounts of hours, got very little sleep, because he was also having to work jobs just to support himself incidentally and support the family around him as well. But yeah, he started to get it together. He graduated from Yale Law very well. I mean, he didn't understand a lot of basic stuff. So, I mean, he talked about how, because he met that Usha that you saw at the R&C. I mean, they've been married for, whatever it is, 26 years at this point or something like that. And she was invaluable to him, because he just didn't know even what questions to ask. He didn't know what to think about in terms of stuff like that. So, for example, when he started having interviews with law firms, he didn't know what to do with the cutlery, because, there would be like 7
that old classic, yeah.
He didn't know how to go about stuff. There was loads of basic stuff that he just didn't understand networking at all. So yeah, he gets through that, and you go through it. And I think what was also so interesting, and this is an older book now, he wrote it quite a long time ago, is he clearly understands the people that he comes from, the people who are disadvantaged. So, for example, politicians just look at something like payday loans, and because rich people take out loans all the time, but they do them over 3-4 years. and they structure it into something. Whereas payday loans, if you look at the interest rate on a payday loan over 4 years, it's like 10,000% or something. But he understands there's loads of situations where you're going to get paid on Monday, but your rent's due on Friday, and you're going to get a late fee if you don't do it, and you need it for the weekend. And there's just one of a whole number of examples where he kind of understands the plight of the poor in a way that most politicians don't. So I'm starting to think, this is quite an inspired VP pick.
Okay,
because he. Not for what he thinks about geopolitics or tax rates, but he
understands the Americans.
He understands the passed over Americans. And actually, a lot of what he writes for Hillbillies is just as applicable to the black community as well, having been passed over by all of that stuff. And, this political system, it's kind of been unlocked for a long time. I think this is the first election since 1976 where there hasn't been a Bush, a Clinton, or a Biden on the ticket.
Yeah.
This has been so locked up. Yeah. And you look at this guy, right? And, we all like Trump. But as I always say, you can only upgrade a boomer so far. And this guy's a millennial. He follows people that we've had on this show.
Yeah, doesn't he know Aaron McIntyre?
Yeah.
I think he actually knows him.
I think I don't know how well he knows him, but he knows him. Right. And he follows a guy that we're going to have on the podcast this week. So, we are all mutuals with, people that he follows. He is, I wouldn't be surprised if he watches all the same content as us. He may have even watched some Lotus Eaters content at some point. I'm sure he's at least watched some of your videos.
Possible.
Well, if we make our thumbnail blatant enough, he might watch this very video.
Yeah, it's quite possible. So
give us a call, Mr. Vance. Come on, we'll interview you.
So I'm really inspired by this because, Trump didn't just pick a VP. He picked the presumptive nominee in 2029. Right. And it's somebody who's in our orbit. So, I love this. I recommend the book. It's a short book. I read it in about 3 hours. I know I read faster than most, but it's not that long and it's a good read. So yeah, check it out.
Hi folks, thanks for watching. And if you'd like to support us, you can do so for £5 a month over on lotuseast.com because of course we're demonetized here. And while you're doing so, you can watch some of our amazing premium shows, such as Calvin Robinson's Common Sense Crusade, in which he uses the word Mohammedan more than anyone else that I know. And go and follow us over on Twitter/X at lotuseaters_com.